Welcome to KTAL News Now. I'm Jacqueline Tripp with KTALnews.com. And today we have in the studio Mick Barnes of LSU Shreveport. Mick, you and I worked together on the Caddo Parish Civil Rights Project. Can you tell me just a little bit about what you do with the project?
So for the project, I research activists, research schools, businesses, churches, things of that nature, and their involvement in the civil rights movement here in our city.
And you have this knack. It's so funny because you're very quiet about it and you're like, okay, but you can find some very serious hidden history. And it's very exciting to see someone that you recently discovered named William Pickens. Can you tell us just a little bit about William Pickens? Where was he born? Where did he grow up? And what does he have to do with Shreveport?
So he's born in Anderson County, South Carolina in 1881, the son of former slaves. They end up going to what is now Little Rock, Arkansas, and from then on, the legend begins.
So this is the first generation of freedom. His parents were enslaved. He wasn't. And they leave and make a fresh start in Arkansas. So what happens to him once he gets to Arkansas?
So once he's in Arkansas, he's about 7 years old or so. And then his mom tragically passes away whenever he's 13. So from there, he realized that he got to get out the mud, and he did that.
Yes, he certainly did that. So he had this tremendous drive to get ahead in this life. And what did he do? You wrote that he is literally one of the most accomplished people in American history. Those are big words.
And I meant every one of them.
You really mean that
yeah.
about William Pickens. Okay, so how did he start out? What was his educational journey like?
So he ends up, obviously, once he finishes up at Little Rock High School, he goes on to Talladega College in Alabama. Then he goes on to Yale, and not only goes to Yale, he makes a name for himself at Yale.
And that's the second bachelor's degree he
Second
gets.
bachelor's degree. He ends up getting his doctorate in literature from Selma University. Like, the guy, incredible. And
Right.
once he's at Yale, he wins the 10 Ike Award for oration. And that's no small feat.
Yeah, so he's literally has 2 bachelors, a master's, a PhD, and we're talking about the early 1900s, and he grew up in Arkansas. Is this normal for people
not
in
at
his
all.
generation?
It's not normal for anyone of any background, especially the son of former slaves, to do that. Oh, man.
And we know that he came here to Wiley College. What was his connection locally at Wiley?
He was actually the dean of Wiley College for a couple of years, and everyone loved him there. Like, the guy, there's a certain gravity to this guy that I can't really put in words. You gotta check out the article to see it.
Yeah, and it's a wonderful article, too. If you'd like to visit, you can go to www.ktlnews.com, click to the far left on news, and just kind of hover, and you'll be able to click on the Caddo Parish Civil Rights Project, where you will find man survives police-led lynching attempt in Shreveport, becomes international icon. This is the article
Oh, yeah.
that Mick has recently written for the website, and we're very excited about it. Now, William Pickens, you wrote that he had a lot to do with the very early NAACP. What was that like?
So early on, he was a field secretary. He worked a lot closely with W.B. Du Bois, and by 1920, he becomes the national director of branches. No small feat to move up that quickly. And he establishes over 350 local branches throughout the country. He's going to these dangerous areas, risking his life, and obviously, for our purposes, Shreveport.
And what happens to him in Shreveport? He's going around the entire country speaking about lynching, and he comes here, and what happens?
So he comes here. He comes back here because he came here in August of 1914. In December of 1914, there's a wave of lynchings, and one of those men, Watkins Lewis, the guy is burned in front of everyone.
At the stake.
At the stake. He's burned at the stake, and Pickens comes back here after that. So in his return to Shreveport, the police come in. They try to lynch him because obviously you don't want the NAACP coming in if you're trying to uphold white supremacy. So after that, he comes back again in 1940 to Little Union Baptist Church. That's where Dr. King came and spoke June 8th, 1962. So Pickens spoke at Little Union 40 years before Dr. King. So really, as a whole, when thinking about Pickens, he's one of those proto-civil rights figures, the civil rights movement itself. And we
Right.
don't get to that point where we have a King without a Pickens.
That's a very valid point. And we didn't even realize that Pickens had been here until you found you did all of this research.
Thankful to the Crisis, the California Eagle, those two newspapers were instrumental. Pickens wrote consistently for the Crisis. The guy wrote for them over 20 years.
Yeah, so you told me that by the time Pickens came to an area, people already knew him through his journalism. So this man is an incredible speaker. He is a journalist, and eventually he becomes known all over the world. How does that happen for him?
So he ends up being a spokesperson for the NAACP. He's attending the Anti-Imperialistic World Congress. He goes to Frankfurt, Germany, and lectures to them about the African American plight, about the rise of fascism in their country and abroad. In German. So the guy spoke 5 languages back then. We think, we have Duolingo now. Duolingo can help us a lot. Imagine not having internet and being an African American and lynching at every turn. It's insane.
And he's touring the world and telling others in the languages that they speak, hey, this is what's going on in the American South.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very big deal. He had a lot of books. He wrote a lot of books. Can you talk a little bit about his literary career? I know he started out with Abraham Lincoln, Man and Statesman. He published that in 1909. I think is that probably his first book.
His early publications, you have Lincoln, you have the Hire of Slaves, his autobiography. He follows that up with a lot of his speeches end up being published, and that picks up across the country. We just hit on how he would go to an area, and in that area they know him because of his work. And later on, he basically follows up the Hire of Slaves with Bursting Bonds, and they both kind of serve as autobiographies, but at the same time he's detailing the need for education, and his tone is different. It's not a deferential tone like we see with Booker T. Washington. He comes in, he's saying, we don't want this, we need it.
So the international recognition that Pickens gets, he calls out in advance, what was it, 1935, and he's saying, hey, you guys, we have a problem with this guy named Hitler.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
So the NAACP as a whole, November of 1935, they begin denouncing Hitler's rise, fascism, everything of that nature, and Pickens ends up publishing over and over and over again in the Crisis that we should pay attention to this and not fall into that trap of anti-Semitism. And it's insane. Not just he was correct on the rise of Hitler that early on, he was a super early advocate for women's rights. He knew that there was no democracy, there was no full democracy without women being involved as well.
Right. And the NAACP listened to him when it came to Adolf Hitler. How do we know that?
So through the Crisis, that was the NAACP's official newspaper, and we can see the correspondence with James Weldon Johnson, with Walter F. White, not Heisenberg from Breaking Bad, Walter F. White. Even though they butted heads at time, Pickens and Walter White, they came together about Hitler. They understood that if what they were experiencing during their lifetime was American democracy, how it was working backwardly for them, what would fascism bring? They spoke a lot about when the fascists came to Madison Square Garden in 1939. They were very, very upset about Nazis marching the street.
Wow, that was very early. Pearl Harbor didn't hit till 41.
Yeah, they were on it.
Yeah, they really were. Now, what was his relationship with Miss Mary McLeod Bethune?
So, she's such a sweetheart. So he awards her with the Spring Honor Award in 1935, and it's to recognize the highest level of achievement in a said field. And obviously, she was close to FDR and Eleanor Roosevelt, and not only did he award her with that, rewind 12 years before that, he awards George Washington Carver, and I know you love him.
Yes.
I know you do. Awards him with the Spring Garden Award in front of a crowd 15,000 people.
Right. And then George Washington Carver stood up and spoke. He was also a really wonderful speaker.
Mm-hmm.
And then what happens after Carver speaks? But we have Pickens stand up and give an address.
We have Pickens stand up to give an address, and what's really cool about that NAACP convention, Pickens, obviously, we know him as a powerful orator. But in that moment when they wanted the crowd to simmer down, you can read it in the crisis yourself. He puts a hand up, voices stop. So if you're powerful with your words, imagine how powerful you are without speaking.
Wow. Yeah. I haven't heard one of his speeches yet. Do you know if any are recorded? Is that something
I haven't seen any of them that were recorded. I'd love to hear the man's voice. You hear consistently when looking through, looking at the great African American speakers, you consistently hear his name up there with Dr. King and with Booker T. Washington. How not only captivating they were, but you see whenever he comes to Shreveport in 1940, he speaks so well that you get 15 new members of the NAACP in Shreveport. They join immediately after he speaks at the request of then President M.M. Flynn of the NAACP, who ends up passing the baton later on, Dr. Harry Blake of the Union, and becomes the NAACP president.
Yes, so this is just that one little generation.
It's so connected.
That's beautiful. Someone very prominent in civil rights history wound up after he stopped with the NAACP. He stepped down from his position. He was getting older. Who filled his shoes?
Oh, man. One of my favorite people in American history, Miss Ella Baker, ends up coming in. She fills that role of director of branches, and she comes to Shreveport in 1959. She helps Dr. C.O. Simpkins in attaining higher levels of voter registration for African Americans. She stayed here 3 weeks on end. She stays with Willa Bell Clark. Love her. She's one of the unsung heroes. She asked for her name to not be attached to this because, you're helping with the movement, you get fired. Mm-hmm. So once Ella Baker takes his place, Pickens goes on to work for the Treasury Department in the sale of war bonds. He was instrumental in garnering African American support for World War II. Without
was
him,
he successful?
Oh, he's so successful. The guy, if he asked you to jump, you ask how high. There was nothing that man couldn't do.
That's amazing. I am so happy that you've introduced me and others to William Pickens, and hopefully this is just barely scratching the surface on the research with him.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you so much for coming today.
Oh, thank you for having me.
For everyone who is interested in learning more about all these stories of hidden history that we have on the Caddo Parish Civil Rights Project, just go to our website at ktalnews.com and you will click loosely on the news button and hover over and come down to Caddo Parish Civil Rights Trail Project, and you will go to a page where you see all of the stories that we've already written. So thank you so much for joining us.